Drinking with Authors may contain adult content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's dark episode of Drinking with Authors. I am your host, Nick Savage, author of Noir, and this episode, as with all episodes, is brought to you by your sponsor, Four Horsemen Publications. Without them, I'd be talking to myself, which I do a lot anyway, so it is just, a little more fun this way. Joining us this evening is author and musician extraordinaire, John Dover, who has written such wonderful comics and novels in the Johnny Scotch series, which is his hardboiled detective. But that's not what we're here for tonight. Tonight, we are here for the spaghetti Western with vampires. Started off with Once Upon a Fangs in the West and just released, which is why we're going to be talking about these tonight, so you can read his newest stuff, Fistful of Fangs. So welcome, and thank you for being here, John.
Thank you. My pleasure.
What are you drinking? You tried to tell me backstage, and my mind was just like, that's a lot of stuff going on.
That's all right. I have a lovely local bourbon. It's Freeland Spirits bourbon today. So it's got a nice buttery finish, nice baking spices on the back of the palate. So just the right amount of heat to just kind of wake you up on just a little.
That sounds wonderful. And as I am way more under the weather with my allergies, not actually sick, but allergies than I want to be, I am just not drinking today. So you're going to be doing double duty, which you said you were okay with.
Yeah, I said I'd pour a double. I'm good to go.
So with that said, let's do a quick cheers, and let's have you tell me about the spaghetti Western with vampires and how Once Upon a Fangs in the West leads up to, without spoilers, of course, Fistful of Fangs.
Absolutely. So yeah, a few years ago, I wrote and released through another publisher the Once Upon a Fang in the West, which really just was my love letter and homage to spaghetti westerns. But I've really been getting into writing horror as a little departure from the Johnny Scotch world. A lot of short stories published in anthologies and such. And I had just watched one of my favorites, the namesake for the book, Once Upon a Time in the West. And for whatever reason, I dove into this short story that starts off with this wild bar fight, which was kind of a throwback to my Johnny Scotch stuff, but bar fight between two vampires. And then the major twist, which happens right at the beginning, so don't feel too bad about it coming out. Major twist is that right after the bar fight, the winner of that fight gets devoured by a creature he had never encountered before. So what I did with that book was I brought in a nemesis for a vampire. What in the monster world I've always seen as a very strong, very unbeatable, immortal, foil. So I wanted to up the ante a little bit, and from there it turns into kind of a chase kind of story with trying to recover something from that creature so that they can bring the main vampire back and do a battle of between everybody at the end at full power. So that was what I did with that one. Introducing this character named Ruby. And Ruby, just her voice ended up being very strong with my readers. She was very fun to write too. It's like the ultimate femme fatale, very quick-witted, stronger than everyone in the room, smarter than everyone in the room, really fun to write. So when I was, diving into the second book a couple years later, I actually decided, I was going to try and put Ruby behind me. I wanted to see if I could take another route. So with this second book, I dove into the world of werewolves. So I introduced them into this Old West world, this spaghetti Western feel, to see if I could expand the world and have some fun and maybe bring some vampires in as well. And lo and behold, my favorite character managed to come back to life pretty quickly. So I really tried to evolve her a little bit in this second book. It's got some, in my opinion, it's got some real fun, creepy sequences. I didn't go super dark and creepy on the first book. It was very much, they're both bloody romps. I mean, to be quite honest.
Ain't nothing wrong with bloody.
Yeah, my pages are coated in blood instead of ink. So I kept that because I really enjoy that sort of visceral writing. I tried to infuse it with a little darker atmosphere at times, though, with this one.
So when authors are creating worlds and everything like that, they have to go, what's different? What's this? What's that? And you don't see a lot of, there was a movie, you know what I'm saying, that I've seen where it was, vampires and cowboys and stuff like that, but it's only been done like a handful of times. So this is a relatively niche kind of unexplored take on the vampire genre. Did you then keep your vampires a little more traditional in the sense of the Bela Lugosi, obviously in the spaghetti Western setting, but that style vampire, or is it, how are the vampires, I guess, is where my mind's trying to get me to. So I'm just going to say it like that. Tell me about like the lore of the vampires that you can without, again, no spoilers.
The vampires are pretty straightforward. They'll feel very familiar. I avoid the religious aspects of the vampires in this. But they still, if they're exposed to sunlight for too long, so it's more of a Bram Stoker version where they can go out in the day, but they have to stay very covered. They are very low powered during the day. It's not their chosen, hunting grounds. So I kept them pretty straightforward.
It makes sense. Yeah. No, and that makes sense to keep vampires, especially when you're doing something different, to not change them up too much, because then for the reader, it's a lot of what's going on. Let me keep up. This isn't what I thought. So you're changing the setting and the time period to a point where it's, the genre it is. So it makes sense to keep them a little straightforward and more familiar, as you put it, for the reader. The Johnny Scotch comic book series had, if I recall properly from my research, a series of comics and then 3 novels.
Correct.
Are you going to do not necessarily the comics with this, but are you going to keep it at 3, or are you? Is this going to be a kind of continuing series until you decide elsewise?
The Johnny Scotch?
No. The vampires.
Right now, I have a couple of new projects on my back burner, so I'm letting the West kind of percolate for a while to see if there's a strong story there. I've got a couple of, when I was writing this or getting the starts of this, I definitely had a couple of fun ideas that didn't make it into the book that could be expounded upon. Not to spoil anything, I do leave it on a semi cliffhanger of sorts. So at least the door is open for me to go and play in that world again.
I love cliffhangers. I know that that's an unpopular opinion because everyone wants their books wrapped up in nice little bows and everything like that. But I think leaving things open-ended to a point, especially if you're going to let it rest, while you let other things, let it simmer while you let other things build, is a great way to keep them wanting to come back instead of wrapping it up. You know what I'm saying? Well, you can't just have it all handed to them. And I love that.
And I kind of look at it as, even if I don't revisit that world, it gives my reader the ability to see that the world keeps going. Something is beyond what I've even written. So hopefully their imagination is given a chance to go wild for a while and just think of, well, what is next? What could be next? And who knows what that reader, if they're a writer themselves, might see that idea and might want to run in some direction with something similar, and that'd be great. That's how I kind of view any of my cliffhangers, is just an open door for anyone to take a look.
No, and that's a beautiful way to do it, because you don't want, the last thing I think you want for any reader is to have them walk away and go, that was great. That world's done. There's nothing to think about or talk about. The idea is to get them talking and thinking and wanting to dwell and live in that world, even if it's a speculation of what happens next. Even if there's no story, they get to think about it, create a story in their head, or at least ponder it, if not start writing fanfic type stuff.
Absolutely.
As an aside, what is your thoughts on fanfic? That was not an intended segue, but I said it, so I have to know. What is your opinion and thoughts on fanfic?
I don't have any ill will towards someone who's going to take the opportunity to be creative in the way that they need to be creative. If it means taking inspiration from someone else's characters, as long as they are doing it respectfully, I got this from here. This is my vision of what could happen. I think that it can definitely be done in a very slapdash way, which I would not appreciate. But if someone's just, sees something in a character that they have to put out in the world, I mean, sure, why not? I mean, I as long as you're doing it respectfully, as long as you're being, aware of the legalities behind, copyright, and if a character needs to be, cleared with somebody, just doing that, which I know is probably the last thing on someone's mind if they're doing fanfic. But
yeah,
living in a world that is trying to be dominated by computers right now and AI garbage, I would so much rather a human be creative with something than be ripped off by an AI bot.
that is a wonderful my allergies.
Oh,
Okay.
dear.
Oh my God. Before I took the Benadryl today, I was sneezing a good 3 to 4 times a minute, just nonstop. And I couldn't work a full day's work because I just couldn't do what I needed to before I, had to do what came next. It was insane. So about that. So me and the producer of this, the coordinating producer who does everything that makes the show awesome, we're talking about Anne Rice, and I'm not going to bash Anne Rice. She obviously had a fan base and stuff like that. But on the topic of fanfic, she was not a fan, actually, because a lot of people, there were innuendos she created in her books of, I can't remember which vampire, being either bisexual or gay. So they had these fanfics of the vampires, and they're basically erotica fanfics, which is fine. There are people who love erotica. She would go on to, because this, of course, was before the days of, the internet as we have it now with Facebook and TikTok and everything. So she'd go onto the forums and just start bashing the fanfic. And without bashing Anne Rice, because we don't speak ill of the dead, is that something that you agree with, or you would let rest and just be like, it's not my fiction, and they were at least nice enough to write something that they felt was needed to be written?
I mean, she needed to handle it how she felt she needed to handle it. I have always been a believer, no matter what type of art you do, whether it's music, visual media, writing, your job is to create it, make it as good as you can, put it out into the world. And we have so little control once it's out in the world, how people digest that art. Some need to continue and expound upon it. You'll get music producers who take samples from albums here and there. You get,
Yes.
people who need to do fanfic. You get, pastiche artists that need to, clip something from a magazine that they saw and put it all together into a brand new mosaic. And I can't say that I wouldn't necessarily be upset if someone wrote something that I truly felt was completely off the rocker, but at the same time, I don't think it's my place to criticize them as a creative entity. I mean, I did a very similar thing in these books. The vampires are very fluid when it comes to their sexual encounters. The werewolves are very fluid as well. I mean, they're all instinctual creatures and act in the way they're going to act. And I write a certain way when I write a love scene, and if someone, I guess, needs more out of that scene, they need more out of that scene, and more power to you.
No, and that's true. And I think you have a very good grasp on the control you have over your own art, especially once it's released, because some people want they there are those artists who created a work of art, canvas painting, whatever, and they're like, this is my intention behind it. And if people are like, oh, that's not what I'm seeing, they're like, well, you're wrong. And it's kind of like you said, art is out there for the world to take and do with as they wish. So
Mhm.
you only have so much control, which I think is a wonderfully self-aware and well-adjusted way to look at art of any form, which is very hard to come by in an art world. Artists aren't exactly known for being well-adjusted in any medium. So it's very interesting to have you coming out with such a well-adjusted attitude.
I think part of that comes from just my upbringing as a musician, which is such a collaborative art form. I've always tried to bring that to my writing as well. It's like, as hard as it is for me to take notes from an editor, I understand how important it is, because my editor makes my stuff that much better. And that collaboration is very important in your art. And we also have to learn to collaborate with our audiences, in that they're the ones that are digesting it and feeling it, and in some people's art cases, just living it. So
Yeah.
we do have to understand others are out there. I mean, that's why we do this, is so that people will be affected by what we're doing.
No, and it's a beautiful thing. You mentioned a musical upbringing.
Yes.
And there's going to be a long segue into the Johnny Scotch novels with this. So I'm going to start with this. You are a trumpeter.
Yes.
You play the trumpet.
I play the trumpet.
You play the trumpet. I am assuming you are familiar with, the man named Miles Davis and all the greats. Did you have, why the trumpet? Let me just ask you that. Why the trumpet? Your general, every musician I know, myself included, is like guitar or some string instrument, the whole rock star thing. Not a lot of rock star trumpet players. So what drew you to such a awesome, but albeit not so front and center instrument?
It was very family based. I was brought up by, my mother and father both went to school to be music teachers. They both went in very different directions once they got out of college, but they were musicians throughout. My mother was a singer. My father was a trumpet player. My sister played trumpet. I tried to play. I don't know. Oh yeah, I do remember why. I tried to play flute first when I went into the band program at school.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work out. And it basically was a fallback because there was a trumpet at home. We didn't have to buy another instrument. I could play that. So I started that way. And I started to discover, I didn't really discover what the potential of that instrument was until I started getting to hear it more and more. So, I went through a very normal progression, at least through, middle school, junior high, of, avoiding practice and doing all the things that kids do to not have to work at something, until I just found that I was actually getting better at it. I started listening to recordings of Wynton Marsalis, Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong. I started out mostly as a classical player. I had a very strong classical upbringing, and then just got hooked on Maynard Ferguson when I was in high school, who was the rock star of the trumpet through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even in the 80s when I was going to school. He was still around touring. So I just kept figuring out that this thing that I'd smash on my face every day was something that I was, getting better at, something that I was getting recognition at, something that others could not do as well. So music was just something that it became apparent at a very early age. That's what I was going to do. And that's pretty much my trajectory, what I was doing for most of my life. I've been a musician my whole life as a professional, pretty much, most of it as well. So
it's awesome.
Yeah, the Johnny Scotch stuff actually came around because I was looking for a way to engage audiences in a different level with my music. So for some reason, this band I was working with, that I was touring around with, just started referring to me as Johnny Scotch. I think the story came around because I was really pissed off at this music festival because it was just not a fun festival. I wasn't doing well, and I was having the hardest time just finding a scotch. So like every time I'd see the band, God, I just got to go get a scotch. All right. So I was just saying that every time, and one of them just started over the mic, just started calling me Johnny Scotch. And my answer to that
nickname.
My answer to that was to be like, well, what would a Johnny Scotch be like? And it just popped. It was like, well, that's like this perfect name for a neo-noir character.
Yeah.
And I as a lark, I made him a trumpet player. He basically, the thought was people would come into his bar with a problem. He'd help them solve that problem and then go play the gig at the end of the night. And, bandmates would help him out. And that's kind of how I built him. He got a little bit more mature as I progressed through him and found his voice. But he's still just kind of he's that off kilter noir character that, is on the fringe of society, that, can do the things the cops can't do. But he came about because I was trying to find a way to get people to listen to my music. So I said, well, maybe I'll write this thing and I'll do readings at shows, which eventually we did create we have an hour-long show. When I do readings for Johnny Scotch, we do it as a concert.
Yeah.
And it has this, funky fusion jazz, backdrop. So my readings are just I call it the Johnny Scotch vignettes. And it gives me a chance to introduce the audience to the characters and to scenes, and also to play my music, and it works really well. And then when we did when I started doing the Westerns, I just changed my voice a little bit. And now I create music. It's a little bit more like Ennio Morricone, the guy who wrote all the most beautiful spaghetti Western, soundtracks. So I just started
most
creating
famously Ecstasy and Gold.
Yeah. So I just started tapping into that. No, absolutely. So I just started tapping into that voice, because he always used trumpet players anyways. So that's kind of how we create the readings for the Westerns now as well.
No, that's wonderful. And thank you for segueing from the trumpet playing into Johnny Scotch for me. That saved me having to think of a way to say that.
No worries.
So wonderful. Yeah, wonderful for doing that. As someone who's self-aware, as you seem to be with everything, have you ever tried playing like string instruments, or are they just not your jam? No pun intended.
No, that's all right. I did. I mean, I tried guitar when I was in high school. Because no one wants to be at a party and someone pulls out a trumpet, no one wants that. But you can go to any campfire and it's like, hey, where's that guitar? Oh, it's right here. So I thought I would try that, and it did not work. So I just stuck with trumpet. I sing a little. So
I loved brass, and I know there's one instrument out there that looks like either a brass and it's really woodwind, or vice versa. But I always loved the wind instruments of any sort. And no talent with those things at all. I could never get it to make proper sound. It is very difficult. And as someone who's been playing guitar for 30 plus years, I give more credit to the wind players, whether it's brass or woodwind, because so much more difficult, especially to hold out notes, because that's your lungs doing that. Bagpipes aside, that's your lungs doing that. Whereas, with a guitar, it's just the amplifier or a Bosch, running across the strings and stuff like that.
That's right. Get that reverb and echo going.
Yeah. Okay. So as a weird question, because your Johnny Scotch is a noir. It's a hard-boiled detective noir series, and I wrote a noir graphic novel. And I love noir. You obviously like it enough to want to write in it.
Mm-hmm.
As a musician, why do trumpets need to be muted for noir jazz? Like what changes? Like what? And it's not. I'm not asking as like I don't like it. Like it's so beautiful and gives it this tone. But what is it that makes the tone so much more suited? Like you can't unmute a trumpet and have the noir jazz. Like it has to have that mute in there. Why?
I think that the mute, especially the Harmon mute, which is what you're really used to hearing in those soundtracks. That's what Miles really made famous, was the Harmon mute. It has this mysteriousness. It has this mystery, this extra, it's almost as if you do run it through a distortion pedal. It broadens but tightens everything, and at the same time makes it more intimate. I'm not going to hurt somebody with my sound if I have a mute in the bell. I can stand, face to face and play, and it's not going to hurt you. So it's very intimate. It's very, close in. You have to be. It's like a whisper. And it takes so much work. Yeah, it takes so much work to get an open trumpet to whisper. You can still do it, but it's so much work, and it tires everyone out a lot faster.
I love your description, because to sit there and say, "Oh, it has a better tone," is a very vague description. You know what I'm saying? It's like an emotion. Like, "Oh, I'm happy." Well, what's happy? Happy to you is different than happy to me. But I ask, what besides the tone? And you gave such a vivid description of the tone that if your writing is half as descriptive as your description of what tone is with the trumpet mute, you're going to have very colorful descriptions that your readers are going to love and new readers are going to fall in love with. Because I do not get a chance to read everyone's book who I interview, and I'm very sad about that. But I have bills to pay, and I'm not a quick reader. But that is wonderful, because I've started going through and trying to, in the new novel I'm working on, and I would like your thoughts on this. I'm trying to get rid of pronouns. Not I have to be very careful saying that word nowadays. When I use vague words like it, you know what I'm saying? Like, as a generic pronoun when describing an event or an emotion or whatever. And even if I just described it a sentence or two earlier, I want to get rid of the pronoun I use after and re-describe it or redo this. Do you have any tips on how you keep the description alive so you don't go vague? I'm throwing one out there on you, so I'm talking to give you a moment to think about this.
Yeah.
But I don't ever throw questions out there as gotcha. I'm not trying to make a fool out of you or anything like that. I'm just trying to keep the conversation going in ways where my ADHD mind takes me.
No, I like this question, because it's a challenging question. When what I run into when I'm writing, and my editor will attest to this, is I am a writer who loves abundance. So when I'm describing something, I will absolutely give my editor choices with the full intent and idea that I know that probably 3 out of those 4 darlings are going away. But I want to, so I just spend my time filling the descriptive moment as best as I can, because one way that I try to write is from a very visual medium. I want my readers to see what's going on. I want them to have a movie going in their head. So part of that is just finding that balance of being very descriptive on the specific thing, giving enough of the surrounding elements so that they can fill in the blanks for the grander vision.
Yes.
So just making that choice of, well, this is the actual important thing. Everything else can
And
just kind of be a little less and less. But once it's all done, you see everything out in front of you.
It is a beautiful way to describe things. And that is why I write books instead of screenplays. Now, I say that jokingly, but as someone who's written both comics and novels, if you're, how do you temper that? Because when you're writing comics, you have, 4 or 5, maybe 10 words of panel, and you got to move on. You know what I'm saying? And so it's all the dialogue in the panel. How descriptive is your script when you give it to your colorist and panelist?
I was working with a very patient partner. He honestly allowed me to provide him with, basically each issue was written like a short story or a part of a novel. So that I later actually released the novelization of the comic. So you can see either the comic or the novel. But I would send him the full quarter. And it's like, this is the issue. Here's 75 pages of the book. And then he would go through, and because he worked in, or still does, his primary job is as a storyboard artist. So he was very good at figuring out, okay, well, here's the scene. Here's what needs to happen in that scene. Here's the next scene. Here's what needs to happen. So he was very good at just pulling out the important visual information, and then would send me the finished visuals. And then I would go back through and I would go, okay, well, this page is now 10 words. This page, it was up to me to do the edit as far as what would make it on the page from a narrative standpoint.
Yes.
And he did such a nice job visually. I really didn't feel the need to be overly descriptive in that stuff. So then it was just a matter of, well, here's the dialogue. This needs to be trimmed. I'm going to leave this description because I want, so it was a very, again, that collaborative process I talked about. We went back and forth until it looked uncluttered.
No, that's a beautiful process. And I am sure your music background, because music is a very collaborative process, helped with, you know what I'm saying, being able to work with someone on the storyboards and the books and the panels and everything like that. Do you, given the option, would you rather work on a solo project like writing a novel, or work on a collaborative project like a graphic novel or a comic book?
I would not be opposed to doing a comic book again or a graphic novel. I would, in all honesty, I think that the 2 horror books, the Fang series, would make really fun graphic novels. What I ran into was, because it was an independent project, it was my own project. Comic books are frickin' expensive. I think in the end, I managed, after hustling and going to as many conventions as I could, I believe I ended up breaking even, but there was nothing past that. And it kind of just broke me because it took 4 years to get all 4 episodes out of the comic book.
Yeah.
So it was time consuming and it was expensive. The novels, I can sit down, and depending on how the muse is, I can write a first draft of a novel, 50, 60,000 words within a month and a half, 2 months, and then go into the editing process. So it's a much quicker-ish process for me. And it's a lot easier for me from a financial standpoint if I have to release it on my own, because I don't have a publisher at the moment. Then it's just, a book is a lot easier to deal with than a comic.
Did you hear that, publishers? Any publishers listening, if you're in the market for some, spaghetti Western vampire kind of fantasy novels, give him a ring, sign him. He's got some more stuff coming out, different worlds, but more stuff. And he doesn't mind revisiting if need be, but publish him. He's a good guy. For anyone listening, gotta picture right there for that.
No, stop.
Stop. I know. No, don't do it.
Don't. No more.
Don't, please, no more. No, it's funny because you, as a musician, I am sure you have worked with people you wanted to, and judging from our conversation, you don't seem like a violent guy, but I'm sure you've worked with musicians you wanted to like sock at least once.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
that would have been me if we ever worked together back in the day. I was not good. I was not a good person to work with at the time when I was a musician because I wanted to be the rock star. And my music suffered because, you know what I'm saying? Because of it, because I didn't do covers. I was pretentious as all shit. So pretentious. I didn't do covers because covers are for people who can't come up with their own music and blah, blah, blah. I was that asshole, and you would have been like, dude, just go away. And I had a hard time doing it. And then as you know, you get older and you mature, and then getting into the graphic novels and stuff, it was so much more fun to be able to do something when you can do it in a mature mindset that I was like, oh, would I want to do music now? No, not at all. Oh my God, no. Mainly just the travel and the sleeping with 4 people in a Holiday Inn 1-bedroom, you know what I'm saying, type stuff. Yeah. But it's a different mindset when you're able to do it via computer and email and stuff like that. I was going somewhere with this, and then my mind just shuts off of me. That's what's happening. The Benadryl, for anyone who's forgot about that from earlier, is kicking in. I'm still have the nose running, and the Hat Man, I think, is like making appearances in my peripheral vision. So I have to work with that in my ADD, which is so much fun. The Vampire series, the Spaghetti Western. You're a fan of Spaghetti Western, and you know the name of the guy who wrote Ecstasy and Gold, which I can't ever pronounce his name, first or last.
Ennio Morricone.
Thank you, because I can't. I just, for whatever reason, I see it and I'm like, I can't pronounce that name. Do you have a favorite spaghetti western?
From that particular genre, my favorite is Once Upon a Time in the West. I think it's just gorgeously shot, amazing soundtrack, wonderful cast, weird as all hell. It makes no sense by the end of it, but it's just a fun movie. Other ones that I always enjoyed, you know, I always liked, I wanted to like Clint Eastwood stuff more than I did, but I always liked his, you know, A Mule for Sister Sarah, his more lighter romps into that world. I grew up in the, you know, strongly influenced by 80s movies because of when I was born. So I got into the more which regrettably that's when like Westerns started to kind of fall off everyone's radar, but there were still a few great ones. I mean, I grew up on Silverado and Young Guns, and then I just kind of started seeing the cop movies that were coming out were really just Westerns, just put in a modern palette. You go with something. Yeah. So I those are the ones I really enjoyed.
No. Now, being a Western fan and knowing and being a fan of 80s movies and stuff, have you seen, and if you haven't, it'll make me think of another question. Have you seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So being the inspiration behind it that it was and everything like that, what's your take on it versus his other movies? And I know this is a very left field topic to get into right now, but what's your take on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I find that to be one of his slowest burns. So like from a pacing aspect, it's the super slow burn with a 5-minute payoff at the end. That's fun as hell. But you got to get through everything. Subject matter, I think it's interesting, playing around with the timeline a bit. It's what good filmmakers or good storytellers are really good at is taking something you're familiar with and saying, yes, but what if? And letting your imagination then guide you past the reality of what happened, and just play in the sandbox for a while. It's like what we all did with our Star Wars figures. What that figure did in the movie, But when you're alone in your room and you have all 10 of them in front of you, then you start running your own gambits around the galaxy, and that's how creative brains hopefully work, is to just continually ask the what if. So I like that movie. I think it's a fun one. It definitely it is slower paced than the previous ones that led up to it, for sure.
Yes.
But I think that's
do you feel
thoughtful.
it was a good song? Do you think it was a good swan song for him? Because that is his final, or at least it was supposed to be his final Quentin Tarantino movie. Do you think that was a good swan song for him, or do you think he could have done one more?
I'm sure if he wants to do another one, he'll do another one. And honestly, because he says it's his last thing, that makes him coming out of retirement that much more exciting. So I'm not too worried if he decides to do another one. I was a little disappointed that he revisited Kill Bill. To me, that's kind of like the George Lucas, going back and revisiting his old works and deciding he needs to mess with things. It's like, you had a great thing. You have to. This is my curmudgeonly thing. You already put the art out there. You're trying to have a revisionist history, basically, of how we consume your art. And it's either done from a selfish standpoint of, I want you to see it differently than I think you're seeing it, or it's done from a financially selfish standpoint, which is just a bummer, because I don't think he's hurting for cash. I'm sure he can pay for his own latte at this point.
I don't know. Have you been to Starbucks lately?
No, I have an espresso machine in my own kitchen. I do that at home.
Oh my God. Tell me that homemade espresso is not 8,000 times better than anything you can get at any of the coffee shops chains that are out there.
Yeah,
and I'm not calling out any coffee shop chain, but yeah, you have control. And have you ever done a double pour or a double pool, it's called?
Oh, where you just run the water through again?
Yeah. I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. One quirk that my machine has is that after I've run a double shot and I can walk away, it continues to just, like, the remaining water that was built up continues to kind of drip through at a slow pace. Yeah. So I get a whole half shot of that slow drip infusion. After half an hour, I'll walk back. It's like, oh yeah.
And perfect temperature at that point too. I don't like really hot coffee. I don't want to burn myself drinking coffee.
Yeah. So I just throw down that extra half shot, and it's just like it's all the flavor is right there.
Yes. How do you drink your espresso? Are you a latte person? Straight espresso? Do you do how do you do them?
Yeah, if I'm at a shop, I go Americano, and if I'm at home, it's just, I do double shots all morning. So, anywhere between 6 and 8 shots of espresso by 11 a.m. is about normal for me.
That is a lot of espresso, and nothing wrong with that, because espresso is awesome. I discovered Americanos. I didn't know what they were. And then my wife was just like, "Is espresso with water?" I was like, "That sounds perfect. That's just less cream and calories and just more espresso flavor." And absolutely love espresso, which I know espresso takes us way off topic. That's how this show works. It's ADD in visual audio format. But I love having an espresso machine, and get one. If you're listening to this and you like coffee and you're sick of spending $300 or more a month on takeout coffee, go buy yourself an espresso machine. And don't use regular coffee beans. Use espresso beans. There is a difference. But if you're in a pinch, you can use coffee beans. But get yourself an espresso machine. You're going to save so much money and have money for other things, like far more expensive espresso to spoil yourself with.
And people's books.
And buy people's books. Like, say this guy, John Dover, who's talking with me, he's awesome. And he's got vampires in Westerns. What more can you ask for? Espresso, vampires, and spaghetti Westerns, maybe some scotch to go with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is wonderful. That is wonderful stuff. Before we get off, on any more tangents, I am going to ask you, where can we find you? For anyone listening who hasn't already started scouring the internet for you and your books, tell us where we can follow you on socials, find your website, and but everything. Just give us a shameless self-promotion.
Absolutely. Honestly, the easiest way to find me and to keep abreast of all the things I work on, whether it's music, books, any of it, is just at my website, www.johndoverswebsite.com. If you go /writing, that takes you right to the books. You can even buy my latest book right off of my own website, so you don't have to go through the Amazon beast if you don't want to. I'm slowly populating that website with more and more of my books as they get ready to go up. You can find my stuff on Amazon. Just look for A Fistful of Fangs, Once Upon a Fang in the West, Johnny Scotch, Danger in Bass Clef. Those are just a few of the things that are up right now. If you go to my...
That title is awesome. Sorry. Danger in Bass Clef. That is such a musician title. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, it's there's Danger in Bass Clef, A Song for Charlie, and Runner's Blues. Those are the 3 Johnny Scotch books. And then if you go to my Amazon author page, you can also be pointed to the various anthologies that I have stories in. There's some very fun ones. Carnival of Horrors, I'm in. Tenebro Tales, quite a few of them. So those are places to find me. Socials wise, I am on Instagram as author John Dover, which also ties to my one of my Facebook pages, which is just Johnny Scotch. And you can also find my author page, author John Dover. I also have a John Dover trumpet. They're all kind of tied together though. So if you just head over to Facebook, that's where I'm at. And I'm kind of an old guy, so that's kind of the only socials I'm on at the moment.
No, that's Facebook. Okay.
Yeah.
Social media should be narrowed down to like, here's just one. Yeah. Too much time on socials. So a question appeared in my head because screw time limits. Johnny Scotch is a trumpet player, and Danger in Bass Clef. As far as I am aware, trumpets are treble clef.
Correct.
So what's up with that, bro?
Well, that story happens to orbit the bass player, female bass player. So there's a mystery. Some nefarious characters are blackmailing her by basically kidnapping her antique bass and holding it ransom so that she will do this is where my noir goes a little gonzo. They're trying to blackmail her to do basically a downhill race of death with rollerbladers and guys on roller surfboards. Craziness ensues.
Oh my God, this is so cool. This is so cool. There is an old, and before you give away too much of your novel, Netflix or Prime Video or whatever the hell I watched started recommending really bad 80s movies. And one of them was called Thrashin', with an apostrophe after the N, no G. And it starred post-Goonies Josh Brolin as a skateboarder. And he has this whole gang of skateboarders that he's like friends with, and they're like the good gang who's just out to have shenanigans and skate for the love of skating. But he is the only non-professional skateboarder in that movie. Like Tony Hawk was in it, and like Tony Hawk is like, I don't know, maybe a 12 or 16. Like the kid was like skinny, and I mean Tony Hawk's a skinny guy, even
a scrawny kid in those days though.
Yeah, and I'm like, you would hardly even recognize him type like that, but like everyone was like a professional circuit skateboarder except for him. But the whole thing is the end scene is this downhill thing, and it's not like a downhill race type stuff, but I'm just like, you took that movie and we're just upping it, up in the stake, and I'm just like, this sounds like such a cool comic series that I'm gonna have to get them, because this just sounds great. But everyone listening, you hear that? Downhill death races for an antique bass in Johnny Scotch's Danger and Bass Clef. So my God, go support the comic book industry. And well, not the industry, just the one guy who has a comic.
This guy.
Yeah, and let him buy himself a latte he doesn't have to make himself.
Yeah.
No, that is wonderful stuff. And it's fun when people have fun with their writing too. Like, you can take it seriously, but you still have to have fun with it. So as we come to the end, I ask everyone this. One piece of advice you can give an aspiring writer, if you had to narrow it down.
The best advice that I have given, will give, and will continue to give, and yet do not follow to a T, is to just make sure that you write something every day. It's very hard sometimes, especially when you're in the middle of a project and you feel that block coming on. And sometimes you just need to write 100 words of nonsense to kind of kick that dam open and keep going. But the problem with not writing something every day is that it turns into, well, I don't need to write today. And then it turns into, well, I didn't write yesterday, but today's not going to happen either. I'm sure I'll pick it up tomorrow. And then all of a sudden you're a week, a month, a year in. And then when you do decide to jump back in, it's just a little bit of a slog. Of anything that the pandemic did to me, it kind of did a little bit of that to me. And it took me a little while to kickstart my ass back into the creative process.
That is 100% true, because when you start writing, when you're beginning writing, or when you're coming out of a rut, writing 500 words seems like it takes forever. 500 words to a seasoned writer is not a lot of words. But it can, if you're coming out of a rut, 500 words could be like, man, that was like 4 hours of writing. All like, I was like 500 words done. But then you do it day after day, and you're like, oh man, I wrote for an hour and I got like 1,500 words. I'm like, what the hell happened? The more you do it, the easier it gets. Even if, like you said, it's nonsense, or as I'll say, because I'm not as nice as a wordsmith as you are, it's crap. You can write 500 words and have it be crap, but at least you're writing. At least you're getting it out there and you're exercising that part of your brain. So when you finally get to where you're writing 1,500 words, it's not going to be the crap that you had to write the day before or the week before to get to that. So, like, I like that. Write every day, at least something.
At least something.
Very well said. I have had such a blast, and I know my tone of voice sounds a lot more sarcastic than I intended, and that is my allergies. But you have been such a blast to talk to, and your worlds that you create are so wonderfully quirky in a good sense, without being like weird and whimsy, but like vampires and spaghetti westerns, and the hard-boiled detective jazz guy. Wonderful stuff. Johnny Scotch, Once Upon a Fang in the West. I apologize because in the beginning I think I pluralized it. That's my allergies, not me being deliberately assy. And Fistful of Fangs. Mm-hmm. That one was plural. Yes. Fistful of Fangs just came out for anyone listening, so go buy it. Buy the first one. Yeah. Support him. Read some cool spaghetti westerns with vampires. Read some cool comics, and exercise that brain noodle of yours, and be more awesome for having read. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for listening and staying tuned. And until next time, remember, it costs nothing to be kind. John, stick around. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening to Drinking with Authors. Join us next time for another fun conversation with an author over drinks.